It is the 21st century. There are too many video games. But out there, it's waiting. The best video game you've never played. Hello and welcome to The Best Video Game You've Never Played, the podcast where I, stand-up and improv comedian Lewis Dunn, invite guests on to bring on what they think is the best video game that I've never played. I spend a week playing it, and then I get back to them and have a chat about whether or not I agree that yes, they have managed to find secretly one of the greatest games ever made, or whether or not no, their tied-up ideas of nostalgia and childhood have accidentally warped their view of what is otherwise a deeply flawed video game. This week's guest is writer and comedian Ed Greenwood. Ed and I are good friends. We met at the University of York. We had an absolutely wonderful time doing comedy together. Ed isn't much of a gamer, so I was actually quite surprised when he got in touch with me and said, I think I've actually found a video game that you've never played that I love. He told me what it is, and he's brought on a game that, frankly, I cannot believe I'd never heard of. It's an incredible video game. And, well, let's not delay any further. Let's find out what is the best video game I've never played, according to Ed Greenwood. Hello, Ed. How are you?
I'm very well, Lewis. Yeah, thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm having a really odd week, I'll be honest with you, Ed, because I've been playing this game now for the past week, and I don't think I've ever really quite played something like this. So why don't you tell our listeners what it is you've brought along?
Okay, so this is a game called The Black Line, and it is a game that appeals to certain of my sensibilities, let's say. There's a historical element, there's an investigation element, there's aspects of it that are problem-solving, aspects of this that are more sort of in-world, moving around, there's a bit of dialogue-y stuff. But basically, the premise is that we start in 19th century London, which is obviously a really beautiful, fascinating time. Well, we'll get to the beauty element. I suppose aesthetics are relative, but we'll come back to that later, especially with this game. But it's a really fascinating period of time. This is at that point is the centre of the entire world, and literally it is a cesspit of humanity among other things. And it's basically a game where, it's also the kind of the beginnings of science, of modern science. And I think that it's something that has a lot of sort of fingers in lots of different pies, this game. I know we'll probably come on to some of the game dynamics later, but it is it's something that appeals to a lot of my own little peccadilloes, shall we say.
It's true, and it has to be said as well, as you say, for a setting 19th century London, it's not one that games have looked at a lot. Like, I off the top of my head, I think Assassin's Creed Syndicate's maybe covered it. I think like there's fictionalized versions of it, like Fable 3 kind of has a sort of, I suppose that's more Regency actually than 19th century, but it's sort of.
It does all blend together, doesn't it? I think you've got because I'm an 18th century person by my master's degree, and that bleeds into Regency, that bleeds into, technically I did a master's degree in the 18th century, but then we were told the 18th century starts in 1660 and goes on until 1851. So as far as I'm concerned, this is great. This is my bag. It has been covered in other areas, and I've not played that Assassin's Creed game, but I've watched my sister playing it and quite enjoyed, because I live in London. I suppose that's another reason why I like this so much. I work in the West End and near Soho, where a lot of this is set. And so it's quite, it's just fascinating running around. And it was fun running around in Assassin's Creed, and that had a feeling of reality and realism to it. But also it was nonsense about, Templars and all of that. Fun stuff, and that's the world, that's the universe, that's great, but it's not the same as actually, this is the gritty, brutal reality of 19th century London, and, well, as we'll find out, an entire globe of diseases and evils and social evils, which,
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
to explore that in an interactive video game is just a delight.
Well, this is the thing. I think we should probably say at this stage, just for the people listening, The Black Line is kind of a fascinating game in terms of its release, because it came out on PC and not anything else. And like, you can't get it on Steam, you can't get it on the Epic Game Store. It was independently published by the publisher, which I think is I've got it here. It's Ceramic Interactive, and they basically published it on their website. I'd never heard of this game until you brought it to me, and you were so keen to pitch it to me because of this setting in it and the realism that they go for. Because basically, this game is about the disease element of an era of that time, and of course, that's hyper relevant to where we are now. So this game, like, it came out in 2016, and it has pretty accurate disease modelling in terms of the spread of a disease.
The epidemiology of it is, I mean, could it come at a more relevant time? I mean, actually, this was 5 years ago. It was released in 2016. But talking about it now, could it be at a more relevant time, other than maybe 1 year ago when it all started? But you know what I mean? It's good. It's topical.
Yeah, and so this is the thing. I think we should probably say you in this game play as a doctor character. So your job is basically to go and deal with a series of disease cases that are popping up, and part of your, like, the way that you play the game is that sort of part of the game is recommending treatments. But of course, this is the 19th century, so your recommended treatments are just like, it's almost actively satirical, the idea that you're turning up to help anyone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like anyone that did GCSE history, you probably had to do history of medicine, and really, it's not until at least until the invention of penicillin that anything like reasonably acceptable outcomes for medical practice exist. So in a way, you kind of have to take a bit of a back step and say, okay, yeah, I wouldn't be doing these things myself, even as a complete medical nonce. Novice, that's what I mean. But yeah, I'm a medical nonce. Yeah, great. Don't trust that.
Yeah.
Don't let him in.
No, don't go near.
But I mean, to be honest, you're not much less harmful than a medical nonce in this game. But I think, okay, so it starts as it's quite adenine in a way. You are, a doctor. You obviously have some quite wealthy clients, but you also have to do your pro bono work and a lot of that does take you to Soho, which at that time is kind of transitioned from being quite a wealthy, fashionable area of sort of Westminstery London in the 18th century. By now it's just completely slums, and it's where a large, you'd have multiple immigrant families living in one bedroom at that time, large Italian influxes, but also this is the centre of the British Empire, and so it's literally it's a hodge of the entire world, which obviously has its, we all know that that's got some brilliant aspects to it, but in this moment in time when there was very little in terms of public health or buildings, plannings and stuff, it doesn't go quite well. So you have to go basically in your pro bono work. You've got to kind of use your tools. You've got there is sort of, I mean, we might want to discuss some of these later, but essentially little mini kind of the games themselves where you need to look for symptoms, where you need to.
Yes. Yeah.
Should we address... actually, we'll come back to scrying, later. But essentially what you end up having to do is identify what you think the illness is. And you basically go through a couple of... a sandbox couple of levels where you have to kind of say, yeah, this is, typhus, or this is... it's not plague. I can't remember because it's been a while since I actually played it. But... It's a really it's tuberculosis is another one, consumption as they called it back then.
Yes, yeah.
So there's a couple of quite simple ones, and then what happens is this sudden twist happens where it kind of goes from being like a game where you kind of go from person to person, like essentially fixing people, and then it kind of turns into an investigation game.
Well, yes, yeah, because you suddenly start to realise there are patterns of outbreak going on in the city of London, kind of similar to the epidemiology that was done at the time. So there's a sort of, you're right, there's a shift from the sandbox element of you've got lots of different types of diseases, and there's this sort of prioritising of like, well, can I get this person this medicine? If I do, it's at the expense of another person, and there's sort of this I'd say a moral choice system, but it's almost more of a resource management system that you're trying to make these decisions. And then you start to realise that there's a cause to a lot of the illness you're seeing, and it's less about treating individuals and about trying to find the cause of what's going on.
Well, because you start, what happens is you get that first couple of cases where you're kind of tricked into assigning it as typhus, but then it becomes quite clear that something more sinister is happening, and that's kind of when the scrying element starts, where obviously you have your diagnostic kit, right? So you've got what's obviously quite a hideous looking thermometer, but it's what they had at the time, and you've obviously got your various you've got your anatomical book that you can reference to find certain symptoms and things like that. I think there's it's preposterous. They've got like drawings by Andreas Vesalius, who's like, that's 300 years ago, that they would have more up-to-date stuff than that, but never mind. But they have, it's when you start scrying, and it's because obviously it's the nature of the illness, as we kind of learn, is cholera. And this is when suddenly, boom, we're in an international thing, but we don't know it's cholera yet. But it's when you first have to look inside that chamber pot that everything kind of takes a bit of a twist, and it actually gets much darker, and it gets a lot more uncomfortable.
It does, yeah. And this is already a game where you've had to lance boils with some pretty unsanitary needles.
You're obviously doing way more damage than you are curing as you wander around with unsanitized lancets, and but yeah. So I suppose it's when you have to first sort of do the scrying in that chamber pot that you kind of, and you effectively have to mark that as, okay, so this is I suppose one of the terminuses of the Black Line, and then that's what this is suddenly about. It's now about tracing, and so the gameplay kind of changes a little bit, and then it gets a bit more sort of, I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Aronovich, but like Rivers of London, like suddenly you've got underground rivers, you've got to kind of interview people, find out, it's a kind of a crime, it's almost like a whodunit, and you've kind of got to piece together the history of, okay, so the first person, I believe it's a laundress, isn't it, or a washerwoman, and you have to figure out where she's getting her water from, or like what the disease is. But obviously we kind of have to approach it with knowledge that we are in the 21st century. We know that this is a waterborne disease.
Yes, yeah. There's a certain element of dramatic irony that we, the player, have, is that you bet if you know anything about cholera, you're like, this is obviously cholera, and the reason the game is fixating on the water supply is because this is going to turn out to be cholera.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think the game holds back on that. I don't think the game is drawn to any like mystery of the idea that it's going to be cholera. It's just that you have to play as the character, learning that, as it were.
Exactly, and I can see why that might be a sort of suspension of disbelief thing. They're not saying, it's not a whodunit and the answer is cholera, because that would be a ridiculous idea for anyone, because that's like saying, it would be like trying to solve a crime that we know who done it. Literally, we literally know who did it. Yeah.
We start off,
So but I think it's more about that tracing, and then I suppose it's more about the social commentary, where you have to trace the Black Line back. Obviously, there are some puzzles that you have to solve, whereby, okay, so that laundress, that washerwoman, we are told where she gets her water from, and then that turns out, and that's a dead end. Where we find out where she gets her water from, well, nobody else is, the Black Line kind of stops there. Nobody else has been.
Yes, it does, yeah.
But then obviously we find out that's because that's where she's been getting her water for the laundry, and not where she's been getting the water to drink.
Not where she's been drinking the water, yeah.
and that's infuriating.
And that's kind of fun, though, because it builds into this idea of, again, if you knew anything about cholera, but they kind of, like you say, they mislead you because you end up tracing the source of the laundry water, and you assume, because you're still working with that idea of, I've forgotten the word for it. It's the idea of bad odours, and the idea that, like, is it...
miasma, yes.
Miasma, that's it. There's a whole section in this game about measuring miasma. There's a miasma meter, and it's like deliberately useless.
I find it delightful that there are whole chapters of your reference book which are dedicated to stuff that we know is bobbins. Like, there's stuff about my asthma. There's stuff about, like, it's not quite, they don't quite go as far back as humours, but you know that they would have, like, whoever was making this game was having fun with medical history, and they might have done that if they really wanted to. And your tools include nonsense like, Epsom salts and things like that. and like when somebody has, I think one of your wealthier clients in the sand pit sort of bit at the beginning, though he comes back later, but he has a heart attack. And you treat it with French brandy, which is just delightful. As that's your secret weapon, is French brandy. But obviously,
it's French brandy. Yeah,
he comes back later, and I think this is when I suppose some of the social commentary happens. Is that the black line is drawn to him in a way, or you could say that it's from him or to him, because he is struck with it, and suddenly it's not just a problem for povos living in Dean Street or Greek Street or Frith Street. It's affecting the wealthy people, because that is how, that's how all social evils are. It's not just confined, although some people get it worse, obviously.
Well, it's also quite interesting because they satirically have a go there, because what ends up happening is, because your work gets prioritised to the wealthier people to treat them for symptoms, it should be said, they sort of pull you back into the diagnostic side of things when you're already on the trying to trace it side of it. And so what ends up happening is you do give them the full treatment for cholera, which absolutely does not help them in the slightest. And so there's sort of a commentary there about pulling resources away from where they're really needed for the sake of the wealthy getting their bit.
Yeah, because what you're essentially doing is badly treating a disease for one person, and it's not going to work. But it's just basically, this man is just a big, mutton chopped Karen who's insisting on speaking to the manager and won't let you go away. And actually, what you should be doing, and this is what happens sort of later on in the game, is you kind of end up having to run around and like close off water pumps and try and prevent angry citizens from accessing water and using latrines. And I suppose there are elements that I suppose you could almost call it combat that happen at some points, whereby you need to hold people back, because people are quite set in their ways, which is a theme that keeps happening even in this world of change, scientific change, globalization, empire. People are quite set in their ways, both the rich people and the poor. And so you do end up having to literally fight people in the latrine.
You do. There's a section where you have to fight off a series of washerwomen trying to get hold of the water pump of cholera is. And you're using the stick that you took as payment from the wealthy family to just beat them away from the pump to make sure that they don't use it. And it's interesting because it recontextualizes a section that would otherwise be very problematic, that you're just there with a cane, hitting an elderly washerwoman going, don't do it, it will give you the black disease.
It's not just one-sided, is it? Because they fight back. They have their paddles.
They do. The large paddles they used to stir, they're whacking you back, saying, "Get off me, governor, get off me. I need to wash them clothes. The lordship won't like it if he gets them clothes back dirty." It's a scene that touched me in a way, because it sort of highlights the problem of, people are trying to go about their day-to-day lives in the middle of what ultimately, if they keep going without changing anything, it's going to hurt them. And so you ultimately, in the short term, yes, maybe you break a few bones of some washerwomen, but in the long term, you're preventing them from getting cholera.
You are, but then also, I suppose the other thing is that some of the washerwomen already have cholera, and I think that's another thing about about power structures and the use of force, because I don't know about you, but when I played it, a couple of times I hit the washerwomen too hard and they ruptured and they infected other people with cholera. Just from that sort of splashback. Yeah,
it has an area of effect type moment where there's an explode. If you hit them too hard, they explode and their blood and entrails go everywhere, and then if there's children nearby, they inhale the blood, and then that can give them cholera, and then if they go back to their families, it's so.
And it could, and obviously it's a danger to you. It's at this point that the health bar, which has been completely pointless all the way through, apart from a couple of times when maybe you get accidentally hit by a horse or something while sort of navigating the streets of London, it just feels a bit arbitrary. But it's at this point that it suddenly kind of starts up, and it gets you can get infected with cholera. I don't know if that happened to you. Did you ever end up getting that health bar all the way down so that you were bedridden with cholera?
I think I did. I did once, and I had to reload because unfortunately what happened was much like you in the section with the washerwomen. I did go absolutely hog wild with the cane, and what happened was I ended up infecting quite a few people around me, and then I thought, well, I can't let them run off with the cholera, so I had to beat them with a stick as well. It got really absurd, frankly. I think actually at the end of the game they give you a kill count, and mine was well into the hundreds because I just had this daisy chain reaction of spreading cholera through beatings. So I had to reload and go again. But again, it's kind of interesting. I love the fact that the game let me do that. I love the fact the game taught me the lesson that you just can't.
Well, this is one of the beautiful things about it. It's about learning lessons. It's about learning lessons about society, about about the strength of washerwomen and indeed of the cane. And there are many things about it that are, I think, so I ended up in bedridden, I think 2 or 3 times while I was first playing it, because I suppose, like you, I did go a bit overboard with beating the washerwomen. And so there's a couple of moments where you restarted, but I think I kind of tried to persevere for as long as I could by, you have to kind of do an awful lot of WASDing to try and aim for the chamber pot and for mopping up as well, because you don't want to infect anyone else. You don't want it to affect your household or your own family. And you've got to top up your fluids, which is interesting because that's the closest it gets to actually how you can treat somebody for cholera. Is
how you would deal if you had cholera. Well, the thing I found really interesting was they make that cane combat really satisfying, and they have that set piece where you realise that you can't just go crazy with the cane beating people down with it. But once you get hold of a fully upgraded plague mask and you realise that you aren't actually going to catch cholera from beating anyone, I found the game became a lot more enjoyable, because it then became the case that I could find people with cholera, beat them with the cane, and then move on, and that was a really good way for knocking it down. So
I think that is a way of doing it, and that is a bit of a hack, though. I mean, a literal hack, because you can identify the people with cholera, and you can kind of wait or even kind of direct them sort of like bodily, sort of in their paths, move them to places where there are fewer people around, so that you can basically, cut off the black line. And that is another area of moral ambiguity. Like, how do you stop off the line? But you can just beat people to death in a deserted alleyway.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I eventually, this is the thing with the game. It gives you a lot of options. I found that once I'd burnt down the workhouse and I'd made sure I'd basically made it pretty clear that anyone coming into London wasn't welcome, and I'd cut off most of the supply lines. I'd made it so that London was sort of a closed-off area for me, or at least the part that the game represents was a closed-off area. So it was just a case of rounding people up.
Yeah, which is one way of doing it.
Yeah, you round them up, you tell them that they've got cholera and therefore they're going to meet your blade, as it were. And then you just crack on with it. And I just found once you really got into the beat 'em up element of the game about just beating the cholera out of people, that was a much more fun game for me, because the diagnosis stuff that came before, very wordy, very boring, and we know it's not doing anything. And then it's only once you're actually killing the disease that the game really takes off.
I think you're kind of being a bit reductionist. I think that there's something about, because you're still having to trace it. This is still an investigation. This is effectively what you're doing now. Is you're a one-man war machine. It's almost like imagining that you're Sherlock Holmes and you're trying to foil an entire conspiracy of Moriarty's, right? You've kind of got to go from blackguard to blackguard, beating the truth out of them, literally beating the shit out of them in this case, and fighting your way to the source, which is quite fun. I mean, obviously you need to. I do like some of the mini bosses where one of the beadle for the borough of St Giles's tries to intervene and stop you, and you need to kill him. And
great boss fight. Loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very good boss fight.
The way that he like creates a wall of children around himself, and you have to navigate around them to get to them. I thought that was really fun. I really enjoyed that, but primarily because at that stage I was so like good at dispatching children that I had no issue with that. It was just a really fun boss fight, just trying to deal with the mechanic. I mean, look, this is the thing. We keep hinting at finding the source. Eventually, when you find out what the source is, that it's Jack the Ripper who's been pissing in the Thames, and that's what's been causing cholera, you then get into this really fun game of like trying to catch Jack the Ripper. So you're trying to set up traps for him.
Yeah, you've got to set traps. You've got to basically make a lot of contacts in Whitechapel. This is when the game kind of moves, and I suppose it's almost like Heart of Darkness. You move further and further into the kind of the deepest, darkest London, which in this case is the East End, is Whitechapel. And you have to kind of track him down and attempt to defeat him, which is difficult. How did you get on with it?
Well, I think I initially went for the stealthy approach to him. So I was like setting out nets on streets where he was thought to have been operating, leaving bits of meat in the middle of the net in the hope that he'd fall in and I could catch him and get him that way. But what I didn't realise, and the game does, it's an excellent moment in the game, I think the twist that you get is when you find out that Jack the Ripper and Cthulhu have formed an allegiance, and so he has supernatural powers. So in order for you to be able to take him on, you have to go and form a pact with an unholy god as well.
You do. So I mean, what I tried first is I found this on a very, very, very obscure Reddit page, but you can go back to the first washerwoman, assuming that she didn't die, and this is very important. If she dies, then you can't do this, but you can go back, you can get some women's clothing from her, and you can dress up as a woman of the night and parade around Whitechapel.
Really?
Allows you to... Yeah, so that is one way of getting closer to him, but you're right, you can't actually... He cannot... I think what's the phrasing is that he cannot be killed till you bend to his will, or something like that. You've got to, I mean, that's grammatical nonsense, but you've got to basically, he's in allegiance with Cthulhu, and you basically need to find a similar old one. And I think that's when you need to kind of go, again, you kind of have to go back to the original, gentleman, his lordship. You spent ages, palliating with completely useless analgesics and things like that. And then you find out that he's a son of Osiris. So then that's the way in, basically. You need to get inducted into the High Council of Osiris. And then finally, once you go to the British Museum, once you put the Mask of Tutankhamun on, then you can go back to Whitechapel. You're Kane at that point. Did you do this? Am I just sort of... This isn't spoilers.
No, I did. I got the Mask of Osiris as well. I think the section of the British Museum is absolutely fantastic. It's a stealth mission. The stealth mechanics at this point have been fairly, the game is spread very thin. There's a lot of different things going on in the game in terms of mechanics, but this stealth mechanic I really, really enjoyed. Because the game makes it absolutely clear that the British Museum, it's okay to kill the guards, because what you can do once you've killed them is you can take some of the stuff you've been getting off the people with cholera and just rub it on them, and then it's justified because now they had cholera as well, so they were part of the pandemic.
But that's also dangerous, because if you just kill them and you put some of the papyrus on them, then you can essentially they will be part of your numbers at the end. The problem is, the more people die of cholera, the more... Well, exactly. I can't believe that you ended the game without knowing. But you've got to... I mean, that's one way of boosting those numbers. But the other numbers is that the more people die of dysentery, then the more zombies of blood and feces there are with Jack the Ripper and Cthulhu at the end.
That's true. Yeah, it's a tough final boss fight if you've been infecting people with cholera. But this is the thing. Like, ultimately, you get the Mask of Osiris. You go back to fight Jack the Ripper. There's a very good boss fight. It's almost sort of sort of Dark Souls level of combat. It's very intense.
It's not what I expected from a game that
No.
was essentially about, you start off by giving a posh man some brandy because of a heart murmur, and by the end it's you and Osiris versus Jack the Ripper and Cthulhu on two big old fucking ships in the middle of the Thames doing broadsides, using lightning, strategic lightning strikes. You've got your own armies of the undead. It's a very epic way to as climaxes go, you can't really ask for more.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, the moment where Jack the Ripper says it's like you think you've got him on the back foot, and he says, "Now's the time to show you my true power," and he grows 300 foot tall, and then you turn to Osiris, and he uses his ancient Egyptian magic to turn you 300 foot tall, and you have the kaiju fight of you versus Jack the Ripper in the middle of the Thames in London. It's incredible. You can see the city's on fire. The old gods in the background are about to break through, and you realise that unless you can stop Jack the Ripper, not only is cholera going to continue to spread, but as you say, the armies of the undead are going to spread, Cthulhu's going to come through, the eldritch gods will destroy the universe, and it's all down to you, a doctor, and ultimately the way that you win. And I thought this was absolutely fantastic as a final moment, as a final twist. The way that you manage to stop Jack the Ripper is you overwhelm him with miasma. And so the whole way through, you've been misled that the miasma gauge isn't actually going to do anything. And it's not going to stop the cholera. But if you can get enough miasma into the area that you're fighting, it weakens Jack the Ripper. And that's the only way that you can stop him.
Yeah, that's it, basically. And you've been collecting breath, you've been collecting stool samples, you've been collecting... and this is part of the scrying, when you scry to find out whether somebody has cholera or not, you can choose to retain these samples in a backpack, which is obviously, bottomless pit backpack, but, it's fine. It's an inventory that goes on forever. It's a problem with many video games, but in this case it turns out to be useful, because by the end you need to basically hurl as much of it at him as possible to weaken him. And then, I mean, obviously obviously they were fans of Edgar Wright, whoever made this, because the final sort of killing blow must be completely lifted from Hot Fuzz when Jack the Ripper basically trips up and lands, falls backwards onto Tower Bridge, impaling himself. And it's just, I mean, it's a level of gore that you wouldn't even have expected from a Victorian surgery game.
It's absolutely fantastic. I think that the fact that they commit to that bit so hard is absolutely wonderful. And I really and then of course after that you've got the epilogues that follow about, if how well did you manage the cholera outbreak before you took on Jack the Ripper? How many people are left, as it were? How many people are going to be able to rebuild London after the consequences of what you've done? And of course, you get the good ending if you say thank you every time somebody gives you something, and you get the bad ending if you don't. All the other actions that you take in the game are fairly irrelevant. It's purely how polite you are, depends on what ending you get, which I think is important. It's a good lesson to teach people.
It's also a kind of, I was going to say, it's not quite satirical because it's not trying to be funny, but it is making a point about, it's about how you're a doctor, ultimately, you're a professional man. By the end you're wearing Tutankhamun's death mask, you're 300 foot tall, you're fighting Jack the Ripper using the magic of Osiris, but you're ultimately just a professional, you're Dr. Watson. Yeah. And it's about maintaining that reputation, even above keeping people alive, regardless of your longest combo streak for beating people with a stick. It doesn't matter in the end. What matters is the pleases and thank yous and how much brandy you've given to old gentlemen.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is the thing, stopping cholera costs many lives, but manners cost nothing. And I think that's the lesson that ultimately the game's trying to impart, really.
Yeah. And then there's a secret ending, which I didn't get to, and by the sounds of it, you didn't get to, but this was on the Reddit forum. I don't know whether this was just somebody joking or whether they dreamt it. There is an ending whereby you are summoned to Buckingham Palace to receive the Order of Merit from Queen Victoria and the Order of the Garter, and basically she tries to marry you, she tries to come onto you, and you need to. This is So she basically starts giving you the eye, and what you have to do is you've got to get out another jar. Basically, you've got to crack open another jar and reduce the amorousness of the situation. Or I think you can go the other way and you can let her marry you, but I think most people try to avoid it.
Well, I think it'd be really strange if you were to marry them, because at that stage you're an immortal demigod serving Osiris, so I don't think it could end very well. So you're probably right. You're probably best opening a jar of shit and scaring them off. So look, that was we've basically outlined what happens in the game. I should really start leveling some criticism about this game, because I really love the variety.
I thought I'd gotten away with it. You've been saying it's fantastic. I love the combat. I love the social commentary. I mean,
well, look. There's a lot to love about this game. Its variety is enormous, which does cause some problems in some areas, because you're working through a lot of different interfaces and a lot of different mechanics, and it can get overwhelming and confusing at times. Like the number of times that I was trying to hit a washerwoman and instead I ended up altering the value of the pound was just really frustrating.
I never quite figured out why you could deflate the currency. I know there's a sort of a mini side quest where you can go to bank and go to the Bank of England. I didn't go there, but I think...
Well, this is the thing, is it becomes a problem, is if you do I did do that. If you do that, basically it's like a short press on R is hit, and a long press on R is depreciate currency. And it's a massive problem, because the reason you want to depreciate currency is because then it encourages like international trade. But if you're encouraging international trade, you're bringing more disease.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but I think that might explain some of the reason why I had difficulty with the number of zombies of blood and feces later on, because that spiked at the end, and I don't think I'd noticed that it was linked to the deflation.
You hadn't noticed the currency element. Well, it's a bit of a problem. So I can understand. Like, for my money, I probably would have taken that out of the game. I think also, and it's a bit of a sticky issue, and I don't want to linger on it too long, but some of the voice acting in this game is absolutely mad. Like, the way that they portray different people, like the Italian people are like, "It's me, I'm gonna come over here, I gotta have myself a lovely time in London." It's just absolutely bizarre.
But like the family from Brescia is, I think that's actually one of the cleverest little Easter eggs in the entire thing. Like, the accents are a bit sort of, "Hey, it's me," and the bit where the husband mistrusts you and he actually throws meatballs at you is virtually unacceptable, like, levels of racism. It's 2016 when this was made, but it's actually an important historical Easter egg, because Brescia was one of the centres of a kind of evangelical Christian sort of cholera curing miracle sort of panic wave that kind of swept through Italy. So it's actually one of the towns that's most associated with this specific disease. So I don't think they're implying that it came from the Italians, but I think it was there is that red herring. But I just think that's a really cool thing. Obviously, maybe it could have been handled more sensitively.
But this is the thing. Like I said, the voice acting for that character in particular, I found mostly weird, mostly a bizarre choice. And then, of course, as the game goes on, you know, eventually you end up meeting Queen Victoria, and the voice they picked for her is really weird, because you go to meet her and she's just like, "All right, fella, I hear you're trying to deal with this here plague that's been going about." And it just threw me for one. I didn't really understand why.
I assume that was a glitch. I assume that was just an audio thing.
Really?
Well, I mean, because I was listening to it through headphones at the time, and I just wondered whether it was the quality of my headphones. But if you heard that too, then that's not.
No, I think they fully get. I think they've decided that Queen Victoria was born in the sound of Bow's bells, because she talks a lot in Cockney rhyming slang. I mean, thank goodness there's a Cockney rhyming slang translator, because often I'd come out of audiences with the Queen and I just wouldn't have a clue what she'd said. Yeah,
I mean, you do have to go. You do have to kind of go through your kind of sort of mini library in your inventory to kind of get to the pamphlet about Cockney rhyming slang. I think you can kind of understand most of it. Obviously, the game, again, it's like the game knows that you know that it's cholera, but you still need to do a bit of investigating, and they do kind of come up with some rather ridiculous new combinations for for Cockney rhyming slang, which obviously absolutely cannot be real. So there was one that was it was what was it? It was mother's blood fell in the mud, and she just says, "Oh, he mother's blood, didn't he?" But it's like that doesn't make any sense.
But that's not what it means at all. And then there's some bizarre ones.
No, well, exactly.
Like Control Alt Delete has got black feet, and you're like, well, that doesn't even that's archaic. Not
There's
archaic.
A complete anachronism. I mean, they did play with anachronism, and I think they play with. I mean, obviously Jack the Ripper. Yeah, okay, that's a different time to when Jon Snow was, actually in Soho solving things, and that is different to the Great Exhibition, and that is different to, Queen Victoria's final sort of murder-suicide. But it's all. I think it's all homage, and I think that's one of the things that's quite nice, is that it has that richness of history, of world, of cultures to some extent. Again, could have been handled more sensitively, but I think it, and it's that diversity and richness for this game that's comes from nowhere, right? It was it was Porcelain, wasn't it? The production company. What were they?
Ceramic Interactive.
Ceramic. I think, as far as I'm aware, they've come from nowhere, they've gone nowhere, but the amount of love put into this, and as I say, beautiful. Yeah. I mean the details of the graphics. I didn't have a particularly good PC at the time, but the splatter, the rainbow effects of light reflecting in individual drops of human blood and feces arcing through the air as you beat those washerwomen is just sumptuous.
I mean, It's a stunning use of the Unreal Engine, and I think as well the fact you can replay the entire game in hand-drawn 2D animation is a real testament to the labour of love that this is. I mean, did you look at any of the post-game unlockables? Because there's some amazing ones in there.
I didn't know.
I mean, some of the unlockables in this game are fantastic. Like I said, there's one there, the whole thing can be redone in 2D hand-drawn animation. There's another unlockable where you can play the entire game as a dog. You're not really taken seriously as a doctor, but it's very entertaining. And it's much easier to track down Jack the Ripper because of the smelling mechanics. And then, of course, there's the fact that you can replace all of the, as I said, the problematic voice acting. You can replace it with everybody talks like a clanger. But unfortunately, all the subtitles are then just clanger noise.
Oh, so they didn't even put the dialogue back in. It's just clanger noise.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I didn't play it for very long, but as far as I can tell, if you play it in clanger, the story is also different, so you can't even just remember what you did the first time, because, they're all clangers. So
there's a whole other game within the game that I've just missed, and I need to go back immediately and replay.
Yeah, well, if you can understand clanger, I don't think if you can't understand native clanger, you're going to really struggle to follow what's going. Like, I only played it for a bit, and then suddenly I'm in a part of London I've never seen before. And I'm trying to like catch a series of horses that have escaped from a hansom cab, and it's just I was enjoying it, but I had no idea what was going on.
I mean, that does sound quite disorienting. So you're screaming in clanger while Draymond's horses are just running amok, and meanwhile, secretly evil forces of Cthulhu are at play. I mean, obviously, if you're introducing clangers, I'll have to go and play it, because it seems like that might confuse some of the issues later, especially to do with actually solving the crimes, unless they have a clanger translation pamphlet thing like they do for Cockney, Urdu and Italian. But yeah, presumably not.
Presumably not. Well, I think I opened the manual. I didn't get a full look at the manual, but when I opened up the manual, it just said whistle, 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 Swanee, whistle, whistle. So I don't know if that's on every page, but that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I had this podcast to record. So look, before we go any further, I'm going to say now, we're going to get to the verdict in a sec. But if you're interested in this game, it's called The Black Line. It's by Ceramic Interactive. You can find it on their website, theblacklinegame.com. It costs about £4,786, and
it's
now. About
at the time, it was only £20.
Well, this is the thing. They know that people are interested now, and if you want to download it, it's about 3.2 terabytes. So it's quite a commitment. I had to buy 2 extra hard drives to be able to play this game, but I think it was worth it. Actually, I think I had a really good time. So this is the thing. is this the best video game I've never played? I mean, having talked about it with you, there's a lot about this game I'm going to look back on incredibly fondly. And like, I've got this clanger mode to play through. I think I'm going to have to say, yeah, this is definitely the best video game that I've never played. I think it was a really interesting... Victory! Yes, you've done it. You've absolutely done it. The Black Line, absolutely. I mean, if you're listening to this and you haven't played The Black Line, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Put together a savings account now, put 50 quid aside every month. In a few years, you'll be able to buy and play The Black Line, and you will not believe what you're playing. It will seem inconceivable that anybody ever made this video.
Well, it's also inconceivable that there was no follow-up, right? There was no Spanish flu. There was no SARS. There was no... Like, they didn't do any more of that, and I think that's a real shame. Bubonic plague! Imagine doing that in 1665. That would have been brilliant,
I mean, as far as I can tell, Ceramic Interactive are currently trying to get funding for a sequel, which is why... they've annexed the island of Fiji. They're trying to employ everybody there to be working in their studio so they can do the follow-up. But right now, there's a trade embargo. Really, it's very difficult for them to get any sort of funding at the moment because, America's taken a very...
devalue the currency. It has its uses.
Well, this is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing. So, I mean, as the siege of Fiji continues, we'll have to see how Ceramic Interactive... I'm gunning for it. I really hope they manage to enslave the entire island and churn out the sequel. I think they've called the sequel The Red Line.
Oh, The Red Line.
So,
I mean, that's nice. That's, classic. Oh, God, I wonder what it's going to be.
I mean, they've promised a multiplayer mode, so maybe we'll be able to spread diseases to each other at some point.
That, you know what? Let's make it a date. The year,
yes.
year 2026, we will meet up online and we will play The Red Line. Brilliant. In fact, I'm going to start setting aside 50 quid a month, as you say, now. Yeah. I might invest in Fiji war bonds. I think there's a government backed at the moment.
Yeah, they've got a... Insurgency Go, so they've got stretch goals. Like I say, like if they reach their goal of about 5.2 billion, then they'll also try and annex Cuba. So
you get your own beach. If you invest 1,000, you get your own beach, and you get a named character as one of. I mean, it won't be a washerwoman, but as one of the equivalent sort of named people that you can kill in the next one.
Yeah.
So I put myself down. I put Laura down as well, my partner. So.
That's good. So, thanks very much for coming on, Ed. I had a great time. Did you enjoy time of the podcast?
I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for giving us a sincere, full-hearted, open-minded go. Because it's the best video game you've never played. It's the best video game I've never played. It's is this just the best thing?
Well, that was Ed. Thanks very much to Ed for coming on the show there. As I'm sure you can tell, an absolutely sensational game. The idea that I'd never heard of it, obviously completely unfathomable that I didn't know it existed. And huge thanks to Ed for coming on there. I don't really have anything to plug for Ed right now. He's currently busy with his project of he's joined the front line in Fiji, put it that way. So he's having a good time out there. If you've enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe it. If you could go on iTunes, give it a 5-star review. If you go on Twitter, tweet all about it. I'd really appreciate that. And of course, it's very important to say that this show is, of course, something that's very important to me. I have a really fun time doing it. So I would really appreciate any positive feedback you can give me. And a big thanks to everyone out there who's already said nice things about it. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you continue to enjoy and listen to it. And so now it's just time for the theme music. Oh no, this isn't the theme music. No, this isn't the theme music at all. This is a royalty-free track. Oh, it's by Kevin MacLeod. Oh no, it's called Pixel Pika Polka and is used under an attribution license. Oh no. It's done under fair use, though. It's a free license. I won't get in trouble, will I? I hope not. You can find his music on incompetech.filmmusic.io, and it's a polka track. Oh, no. Oh, what a mess. Oh, and now my keyboard's covered in shaving foam. Oh, this is a disaster. And someone's drawn a moustache on my face while I was asleep. Oh no, and now there's a whoopee cushion on every chair in my house. This is ridiculous. Oh dear. Oh no. April Fools, everyone.